Hey everyone, Spaceman Spiff here, bringing you another competitive deck tech. This time I'm going to be going over the deck I played in the Pro Play Games tournament over this weekend, or more accurately, the deck I play in most tournaments, Jiro. Not only is this deck fun and powerful, it is also a rewarding deck to master. I'm going to go over my list, show you guys a couple of tips to playing the deck, and then review a turn 2 kill from the last Sunday's tournament. So here's my list. The entire thing is built around one card, Specialized Soundwaves. If you play this deck, you will live by this card and you will die by this card. Every aspect of Specialized Soundwaves is impactful to the deck, and I really want to take my time going over it, so I'm going to go over the cards in my list as they relate to this one, starting with the difficulty. 3 difficulty means that you can fit it in at any point on your chain, even if there's a bad check on top of your deck that you can't clear. You'll notice that all the attacks in this deck are low cost except for Zero Gravity Lift and Unwavering Slash. And actually, Unwavering Slash untaps a foundation, making it an honorary 4 diff as well. This low to the ground attack lineup can let us play up to 4 attacks before we even have to commit any foundations if we're lucky. On the other hand, we have the incredibly low control check of 2. This is a very real downside, but one that we can mitigate with deck building. In order to make sure that I don't lose the game on turn 1, I am playing no 3 diff foundations and only 8 2 diff foundations. This goes a long way in making sure that I can play at least 3 foundations before I even have to risk checking a 2. Losing your 4th foundation we can deal with. Losing your 2nd is nearly a guaranteed loss. The large amount of spam in this list helps ensure that we have a solid turn 1 build. One of the most important aspects of this deck is the flash keyword. 8 flash attacks means that we can shut down entire defensive strategies, sometimes just accidentally, but most often by timing when we play our flash attacks. However, you still need to play some non-flash attacks in order to use Jiro's scouting ability and to refill your hand. Unwavering Slash is a great opener in this regard. It gives you time to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, set up an earphone jack from your discard pile, and it cantrips. Your opponent then has to decide whether or not to use defensive resources on this attack, knowing that they may not get another chance to use their enhances this turn if you found enough flash cards. And now for the strongest ability on Specialized Soundwaves, its responses. For the price of 1 momentum, we can tutor any attack from our discard and set up its check with Arrogant Disposition for the 6 check, or Specialized Soundwaves to look further into our deck. Or we can put 2 6 checks on top of our deck if we have enough attacks in hand. Or we could put 2 bad checks on our opponent's deck if we want to mess with their blocks. Or we can put 2 foundations on top of their deck as a last-ditch effort to survive their turn so that they don't draw attacks. All of that packaged in with the incredible defensive ability to just draw a card when you block with it, giving you an extra card to block with. With enough momentum, these can just chain into each other from the discard, and these are your primary win con, as each one gets stronger and stronger from Jiro's responses. So how are we getting our momentum to power this? 2 main ways, one fast and one slow. The fast way is with these 2 attacks, Instant Explosive Release and Home Run Comet. Instant Explosive Release is the best way to set up your turn 2 kill, but it's the easiest for your opponent to play around. They can just block your first attack. Home Run Comet can be used on turn 2, but it's risky because debuilding yourself can backfire if you don't finish the job. The slow way is just poking and waiting until turn 3. Zero Gravity Lift is the best attack for this, but throwing a random flash attack can sometimes get the job done if your opponent happens to be holding the wrong block. Lastly, we have the sideboard. Encouraging Training Partner comes in against Recipro decks, Wall Cling comes in against Tape Swing, Exploding Pride comes in against big momentum decks, Home Run Comet it replaces Instant Explosive Release to Juke, and an extra Zero Gravity Lift against squishy 7-handers. Now on to some lessons I've learned playing a ton of this deck. So first off, we have using Earphone Jack. Don't be afraid to ready a foundation with Earphone Jack early on in the turn. Without that extra foundation, you may not have another opportunity to use it, and you need every readied foundation you can get. Also, always mulligan or review Earphone Jack. Your Unwavering Slashes will find it eventually, and until then, a foundation or extra attack in hand is almost always better. Next up, use your health as a resource. This goes for every character, but Jiro has lots to work with. At 27 life, only the most aggressive decks are going to kill you on turn 2. Try and get your opponent to overcommit and then get them on the crackback. The times when you really want to block are when you have foundations in your hand that you want to get rid of, or foundations on top of your deck that you don't want to draw next turn. Clearing foundations off the top of your deck or out of your hand is just as good as card draw. If you got someone with Instant Explosive Release in games 1 or 2, it's probably best to side them out afterwards. People will play around them more, and you can use that to your advantage when they block your earliest, weakest attack by stringing them out using your other attacks. I swap between Home Run Comet and Instant Explosive frequently, as one punishes early blocks and one punishes not blocking early. Alright, this is game 2 of round 6 of the Pro Play Games 1K. I wanted to showcase this game because it really showed Jiro's explosive potential, and I wanted to show the turn 2 kill and my lines going through it. I started off with 4 foundations in play and an earphone jack, which I don't normally make a priority, but I had it in hand, so I threw it out there and it passed. My opponent started off with 5 foundations in play, a tapped character from passing one of those foundations, a Specialist of Sound, which is an incredibly defensive foundation, and 2 cards in hand. This meant that my opponent was very likely to block at least 1, if not 2, of my attacks. I had 4 good attacks in hand, and I started off with Amplified Sound Blast. I checked a 5, I gave it 1 speed with Earphone Jack, and 1 damage with Jiro. My opponent decided to take this down to 22. After that, I hit a Home Run Comet, it checked on a 5, and I gave it 2 speed with Jiro, 1 speed with the Earphone Jack, and 2 damage with Jiro. So this was my first real decision point. Do I put one of these foundations into my momentum to set up specialized sound waves? In order to decide, I looked at the top 2 of both of our decks, and these were revealed to my opponent because it was a webcam tournament. I saw 2 foundations on top of my deck, which means I'm going to have good checks, but I'm running a little bit low on attacks if my opponent decides to block. I put both of these back on top, and then I saw a 6 check and a 3 check for my opponent. I put the 6 check first, and then the 3 check. That way, if my opponent goes to block, he gets the bad check, and my next attack can clear off the 6 check with Earphone Jack. I put Amphibious into my momentum because I was deciding that I was going to go for it. My opponent took this down to 16, and I went with Specialized Sound Waves, which I knew was going to pass on a 5. I checked it. First, I gave it plus 3 damage, and my opponent gave it minus 3 speed with Specialist of Sound. This signaled to me that he was definitely going to block this. So how do I get extra 16 damage out of whatever I get with Specialized Sound Waves and Home Run Comet? Basically, I want to try and force them to block something. So I removed this from my momentum, and I looked through my deck here, and I got an Amplified Sound Blast, which was my only attack, and a 6 check. I put the 6 check on top, and then the blast, and I drew it, and my opponent went to block. They did manage to block this on a 3, and they got it. Then I went for this, which I knew was going to pass with minimal effort because of the 6 check. I committed a Requesting Assistance, and I started off with giving this plus 4 damage. And now, since the 3 check is off my opponent's deck, I gave it 1 speed and milled them for 1, milling off their 6 check. This is another flash attack. They don't get a chance to respond, even though they don't actually have any good enhances anyway, and they went for the half block. They barely passed, committing all the way out, and they half blocked, so they took 4 down to 12. That was basically game, because I knew that even though they drew a card and had a block, they weren't going to be able to block Home Run Comet, which gets an immense amount of speed late in the chain. I knew that I was going to pass it because I knew that I had a 5 on top of my deck. However, I can't commit Jiro, so before I do that, I commit this because it did damage, and I ready up Requesting Assistance. I know that there's a 5 check there, and I pay for the rest with these 3. I give it plus 5 speed, plus 5 damage. I put one of these foundations in my momentum, and then I immediately spend it and give it plus 6 damage with the powerful, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 charge or high attacks in play. It gets powerful 6. And I got him for 15 damage on an 8 high attack on turn 2. And got the game. I did end up losing this match, but it was a really, really close match. This game was really explosive. It came out of nowhere. It was over in like 3 minutes. Looking back at the VODs from it, it was hard to find because it was a very long stream and it was a very short game. But it really shows what Jiro's capable of, which is just pummeling your opponent. I didn't have to use my card draw. If I had to, I could have. I had 2 spots, well, mostly just 1 spot where I could have used my card draw. And that's something to look out for, is when you run a bunch of flash attacks, plan when you're going to use your non-flash attacks to use your card draw abilities. I didn't end up having to use it here. This was just an incredibly lucky draw from me, but when you're playing Jiro, you're just going to have that. You're going to have some games where there's just nothing your opponent could do. You're just going to play 5 attacks, and they get really powerful towards the end. So that's what Jiro's capable of. It was a really fun match, and this was a pretty cool game. I hope you guys pick up Jiro. She's really good, and this is what she's capable of.